We work with Steven Holl. We worked with Steven Holl in the past in France and in Belgium, and we are lucky enough to. Well, we tried different times in China also, but now we have really a project going on, and it's an amazing project. It's really an amazing project. Okay, great. So Steven Holl is an architectural office, completely outstanding, working with different approaches, and I think that is what makes them even more outstanding. Is that like others, I think even AREP and GFA, and later on OMA, all those architects managed to find their own way of working and expressing architecture, although they have the same pressure, they work with the same clients, they have the same codes, and the buildings could be exactly like very ordinary buildings. So what makes those buildings different? I think that is what I still try to understand. It's just so magic. But Roberto will explain you something about it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you for your team, the invitation. Thanks for our collaboration. And beautiful t-shirts. I just can't get over it. I hope you have one to spare that I can take with me. Very good. Well, thanks everybody for coming out today on Sunday. How many of you are architects? Don't be shy. How many architects in the room? All right, a good bunch. I'll try not to use complicated words we normally use. Let me start introducing the office a little bit. I think you've known of our work, but not so much of our practice. The office, formed by Steven in New York in 1977, now only 2 locations, New York and Beijing. We consider ourselves as one office in 2 places. Steven likes to joke saying that we work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I correct him saying that it's more like 30 hours a day because we overlap. All the work that we do, we don't follow a specific style. I hope that if you know of our work, you have maybe been able to recognize some methodology of work. Every project is site and program specific. We generate these relationships with the site that are not only physical, but also we call it metaphysical, the history of the site, the influential culture of the site. Second, light, material, and detail. Every project that we do, and that goes to the exemplary nature of each one of the projects that we do, is radically different from the previous ones that we've done. There's an exploration of light, materiality, and detail that is, again, specific to each one of the projects. And the third concept is idea and phenomenon. And this is probably what our firm is mostly known for. We have a very strong concept that educates the process of design from the very beginning of concept all the way through furniture selection, materiality selection. There's a consistency to the whole project design experience. Under that methodology, we've completed over 70 projects in 15 different countries. Most of the work we do is international by nature out of these 2 small offices. We've done a lot of work in university projects, museums rather, let's start with museums, some of them in China as well. University projects, unfortunately not in China. If you run a university and want to give us a project, you will be the first one. So please don't be shy, talk to me. Next one, mixed-use projects that we have a lot here in China. These big chunks of a city. This one here in Shenzhen, the Vanke Center, that I hope you guys can have a look if you have enough time to go there and visit the project. And we continue to work on small projects, houses, galleries, even retail shops. We've been lucky to have been honored with several awards over the years, Steven's personally and also the firm's work. Most notably, the 2014 Premium Imperiale, given by the Emperor of Japan to all the arts and architecture. And the 2012 Gold Medal, given by the American Institute of Architects, given previously to Alvaro Aalto, Louis Kahn, and Le Corbusier. It's not only the work that we do, that we touch, but also the books that are written of the work of our office. And luckily, we're very fortunate to have a large following online. So that keeps us very honest, working very hard not to disappoint anyone. Every project that we do is published. There's nothing that we do that we never show to everybody. So for this lecture today, it's a very short time, so I wanted to explore one very simple idea. Architects, we use the term skin, I think a bit too often, reducing what a facade, the expression of the building should be, to a mere skin that protects you from the weather, that allows light and ventilation to come in. For the longest time, I wanted to do this exercise, and because of Robert's invitation, I finally got to do it. I thought, what if you just crop the tops and the bottoms of the buildings of each city that you know? Would you be able to recognize what city that is? These are 4 major cities in the world, and probably through the repetition of the facade expression, of the skin design, per se, you don't recognize what cities they are. Los Angeles, Tokyo, Buenos Aires, and Moscow. And all of them are seemingly variations of the same city in 4 different continents of the world. Second trial, see if you can. I think the ones that you are more able to recognize are the ones that are older cities, that have a juxtaposition of different architectural styles as the technique of the skin developed over time. And maybe the second one from the top is the most recognizable one because of that. New York City. So again, the one simple idea that I wanted to explore in this short lecture showing you our projects is let's consider that facade is an integral part of the architectural design, married to its concepts and that of structure, light, materiality, and phenomenon. An element so ingrained in the whole of a project that cannot be considered as skin dressing up the bones of a structure. So let's take it a bit further. I'll show you 10 projects, only 9 fit in this slide, but just 10 in total, of different approaches to facade design that are, again, intrinsically married to the architectural concepts. The first one, I think the most notable one to discuss on that perspective is Simmons Hall residence in MIT in Cambridge, a work completed in 2002. Not a big building to China standards, 20,000 square meters, that looks for inspiration, another building in the same campus by Alvar Aalto at the Baker House that has inside of it some sort of a circulation space where all the dormitories sort of come out and mingle around. So that idea is taking a bit further into the interior of the space of the building, creating this what we call the lungs of the building that come out to the building in section, getting natural light from above, connecting to the roof terraces and the like. And these spaces would be critical points of interaction between the students living in that dormitory. Lounge spaces and study workshop areas as well. Now, that is taken into the facade as well. The facade then is carved to contain 5 of these spaces where the lungs come out and breathe. And that is already the first move of an architectural concept integrated into the facade design. And these are the terraces that you have 5 of. Second concept is, this is a very tiny site, it's a very narrow site, so it was very important to keep the majority of the space column-free. The idea of bringing the structure to the facade or do what we normally call an exoskeleton facade that should properly represent the structural stresses of the building. The structure is about 25 to 30% of the cost of the building. So we believe firmly that it should have some sort of an expression on the architecture, not just held behind the skin, but rather being shown as what it is, or what it does for the building. We developed this color-coded elevation that sort of shows on yellows and reds where the stresses are more concentrated, obviously around the openings, and everything else becomes blues and greens, and that's how we dressed every punch window in this exoskeletal facade. So there are many more considerations to this project, but because I only have 30 minutes, I'll just move on to the next one. Another project that has a completely different approach to facade design, not skin, is the Maggie Center at the St. Bart's Hospital in London, UK. This is a cancer treatment hospital, and this facility would be a small building to offer comfort for people either getting treatment or family members who come to visit someone getting treatment. So it would be more of a visitor center of sorts, embedded in a very traditional 17th century style architectural campus, right next to a beautiful building by James Gibbs from the 17th century. One of the things that we do when we are in a historical context is not to compete by trying to mimic the historical context, but rather do something different. And by doing so, highlighting the properties of one another. when one is old, the other one needs to be new. When one is dark and opaque, the other one might be translucent and brilliant. In a very interesting move, we carve the corners to recognize the corners of the existing building and allow it to be sort of a strong impression on the facade and articulating the new and the old with this gap. So as you can see already, technology of the 17th century, very different than technology in the 21st century. Facade design becomes very narrow, very thin to carry out the same functions, right? But done in an artistic way. It's really three skins forming one facade. The exterior is a translucent glass facade, and I'll get a little later onto why we have these dots, these points of color, that envelope the structure of the building, which in turn envelopes an interior skin of the building, which is all done by bamboo. Bringing the idea of warmth that serves the purpose of this building, right? In this atrium space that sweeps around each one of the floors. And regarding the facade, again, going back to the outer layer, there is some historical connotations. I said that every project is site-specific. We make references to also the history of the site. Obviously, in the 17th century, or 13th century, rather, musical notation, the new notations were done very differently than what they are, how they're done today. In terms of dots, sort of agreed, and that is reinterpreted as dots on the facade, placing the building historically back to 13th century. These transitions of different skins into the building resolves into becoming the interior environment, built-in lighting also becomes part of this facade experience. Another project, again, radically different than the ones that I just showed you, is our Raffles City project in Chengdu. It's a project that deals with a totally different scale. It's a piece of a city. It's a 32,000 square meter site that holds 300,000 square meters building. The core of our proposal was to create a public space of the same characteristics and scale as the Rockefeller Center in New York, having pretty much the same sectional characteristics, and organize the entire program, the entire project, around this 12,000 square meter plaza. The facades then becomes an envelope of this public space, right? And much like the Rockefeller Center does in New York, it seeks to provide a background among which all the different functions of the building will be located, but not be an element of attraction in itself. It's more about the plaza and the public space. Now, the way that we designed this building, we took a very conservative rule, which is applying a minimum of hours of sunlight to the residential buildings, extruded that into our site and let those rays of light be the ones that are actually cutting the massing. So bringing in sort of what we call a slice porosity block. That's how we call this building, and the slices are cut through the mass by the sun. Every time that the sun cut the mass, the facade became from concrete exoskeletal into kernel wall facade. So there's that turn, again, grounded on the facade, on the project concepts and ideas. Very honest to the structure of the building, right? We also want to show the structure. We have a lot of openings and carvings, and for us to show that in our facade was something that we really wanted to do, and be very honest about what it takes to create these pockets of openings. So you see all the diagonals that are supporting these massive movements. Or along one of the main openings of the building towards Tianfu Square, big, large diagonals that are expressed into the concrete facade. Further, there's another concept of this project which is very interesting. Normally, when you consider a mixed-use project in China, it's basically commercial podium with office buildings on top. But it's not true. It's not a true mixed use. There are many functions that are not held in a project like that. We were able, with our client, to develop a brief that would allow us, obviously, to have offices, hotel, so residential component too. But what you see here in red is critical. It's a public loop of cultural dimension. It's a strata in the center of the building that connects the towers with bridges and provides culture. This is a pavilion, that's another pavilion. This would be exhibitions and restaurants and the like. The building itself, the facade itself then, creates these gaps to harness the insertion of cultural components. In particularly too, the History Pavilion, which is a very simple structure made out of corten steel and bamboo interiors where we could have discussions like this one. It's about this size of the space. And the Light Pavilion, one of the most beautiful pieces of architecture ever done in Chengdu, probably by Livius Woods, an artist and architect from New York City. A magical experience, and I hope that you one day can visit this project. He calls it the Light Pavilion, but he considered, when he designed this pavilion that we embedded into our project, he considered the idea of losing the idea of time and place. The entire facade, interior facade of this pavilion is covered with stainless steel, mirrored finish. So there's the idea of infinite reflection as you stand from each side, up and down, left to right. And at night, you only perceive infinite reflections of oneself going through this amazing space. Another yet very different project and approach to facade design is our current Necropolis project in Taipei. It's a beautiful site for a private project, a private client rather, at the northeast of Taipei city. A beautiful site that oversees the ocean and the mountains. It is a cemetery. But if you were in France, you would go to Père Lachaise, you would see Edith Piaf, Jim Morrison, you would pay tribute to the people that you like from pop culture. If you're in Taipei, you would go to this place. So this place also receives a lot of visitors, which was the reason why one of the two buildings we call the Arrival Hall, and it's a visitor center with museums, cafes, galleries, and the like. And a second building, which we call the Oceanic Pavilion, that is only religious building. It's for urn shelving, it's for ceremonies, and the like. The site is a beautiful site in the mountains. So the first building, the service building, is sort of flat, only has one facade on the south. Most of the facades are interior facades, and are this combination of different domes, right? Spherical space that are interconnecting with one another, from which you can go from one to another. So the idea, the materiality already established by the concept is one that needs to be monolithic, needs to disappear, and just to show you the space. You want to have a wall, but not necessarily mattering what the wall is made of. And the Oceanic Pavilion, the other building, is sort of the opposite. It comes out of the mountain, and explores this intersection of these spheres as volumes outside of the building. Not an easy project to do. But a very fun one to do. And again, the same idea of this continuous space going from one dome to another and to another, where the materiality of the space, the facades, are interior and exterior at the same time. The two sides of the same wall are two different realities, and it's a monolithic appearance. These are some of the views of our design development. This is what we call the Buddha Hall, prayer spaces, and already start thinking about the facades as white concrete, board form white concrete, monolithic and sort of abstract. And these are the series of efforts, test mock-ups that we made. Again, a lot of problems that we had to decide how much titanium dioxide in each one of these probes, whether or not we would entertain coating, which we said no, and the client thankfully agreed with us. So we finally got to a mock-up that we agreed on, and we liked. We resolved the issue of the corner, how one slat doesn't need to then match the next one because of the crazy geometries of it. And it's a project that is now under construction. It's exciting to walk on the site and see these spherical spaces coming up. And understanding the complexity of it, but also the rewards of seeing some of it finished already. Right? And getting exactly what we set out to do, the perception of a monolithic appearance, white concrete with boards that becomes neutral, and the only thing you will see later is the space. Another project that deals with the idea of concrete works as well is our culture center and health center in Shanghai. Two projects that are actually very small for Chinese standards. This is about 20,000 square meters between these two buildings. And there are many concepts behind this building, but I'm just going to run straight into the facade itself. This project explores the idea of porosity and how that porosity creates a new facade to the river and to one another. So again, these operations on facade would also inform what happens on the interior of the space. So some of the cuts on the facade will become cuts on the slab. So bringing what could be a planar or two-dimensional operation into a three-dimensional environment. And very local technology, very cheap construction budget. We had to adjust a lot of our design to meet those requirements, but again, something that the facade in itself is the expression of the concept and can be easily done with local concrete technologies. For this building, we couldn't do it on white cement, unfortunately. It's a matter of budget, so we are entertaining the idea of coatings. Our Nelson Atkins Museum of Art, that's a remarkable project that I think deals with the issue of facade in a very creative way. This building from 1933, which is called the Temple of the, what they call it, the Temple of the Arts, is the merger of the Nelson's Museum and the Atkins Gallery that became the Nelson Atkins Museum. This is a 1933 neoclassical building by Wright and Wright, architects in Philadelphia. Competition brief was such that required a new facility opposite of the existing building of the same area. What sometimes we do is that we don't follow the brief very well when we think we have a better idea for the competition, and sometimes we get in trouble because we obviously don't get the project, but sometimes we do get the project. And the idea was to leave this building alone in itself, just allow the new building to be submerged under a sculpture park, be most of it green roof, and only have these 5 lenses of glass facade coming out of the ground. And by doing so, being a good neighbor and a good partner with the existing building. There would be the creation of a public space for the permanent insertion of art. This is a sculpture by Walter de Maria. The entire sculpture park would sort of dress the galleries of the new building. And these 5 lenses would just come out as glowing figures. The idea of the complementary contrast, I mentioned this before in the Maggie Center. When one building is old and heavy, the new building becomes light and reflective. And we work with this idea of complementary contrast in a lot of our projects. And there's another one that we just opened, the Kennedy Center, which I don't have it on this presentation, but it's a remarkable project for you guys to visit if you are in the DC area. In the day, these two buildings would dialogue with one another in one way, and at night in a different way. Dark, translucent. These facades would also allow natural light to come in and bathe all the interiors gallery spaces. It would be an interesting moment in some of these situations where you would have northern light and southern light at the same time. So then you would have 2 different colors of light. And that was something interesting for us to work with at the time. Following the idea of dealing with old structures, this is a competition we just won a few months ago, the Collectors Museum in Angers, France, opposite of the Chateau of Angers, and in a place of the city that is welcoming visitors as they go under the bridge opposite of the castle. And the ambition of this project was to sort of bring the fabric of the city and the landscape of the river into our site and create some sort of a portal between the old building and the new building. The Chateau of Angers, built by King Louis IX on 1238, was basics of inspiration for the design, and also again the idea of creating this portal, right? This welcoming moment for the city. And celebrate the site history too, because all this was reclaimed land in 1820. All this was submerged by the waters of the river. So the idea of proposing a reflecting pond all throughout the ground floor for the reflection of the building, as if the building had been standing on water. There is a second building, which is where the developer makes his money, which is residential condominiums. But even this was also taken into a greater context for the facade design. This is a large tapestry dating from 1377, exhibited at the Chateau of Angers, and that tells the story of the apocalypse, a beautiful story. But the important thing about that tapestry is that it captures certain moments as snapshots. And the idea of using these frames, or the idea of frames rather. Oops, sorry. Oh, the one slide doesn't show up, but using the idea of those frames to articulate on the facade and creating these different bay window moments in reference to that tapestry in the Chateau d'Angers. Another project that we explored the idea of program, institution, culture into the facades is our Herning Museum in Denmark. In a historical site, actually, with the production, a large production of fabric design. The museum having a great collection of Piero Manzoni. Piero Manzoni, an artist, Italian artist, who only lived 33 years, but was very prolific. And within his work, there's a lot of work on paper, on fabric, on textures. And taking these two concepts, right? Piero Manzoni's artwork, 48 pieces of his work in the collection of the Herning Museum, and second, the history of the site of having a lot of manufacturing of shirts, actually, shirts like what I'm wearing now, informed the idea of having the roofs become sort of sleeves of a shirt floating on a table, and through the overlapping of these sleeves allow natural light to bathe all the interior spaces and all the art exhibited there. Making a stronger connection with Piero Manzoni's work, we thought of why don't we try to impose a texture on the concrete facade, a texture that feels like it's made out of fabric. Many trials and errors, and this is something that we try to do later in our Chengdu project, but given the scale of that Chengdu project and the intensity of the construction phase, was impossible to. But in this museum, which is a small museum, we could pretty much develop a very simple technology of dressing the boards for the concrete with tarp, with green tarp that you would use for construction. And that is the facade. And I like what you said, Robert, the different lectures or readings that a project has as you come closer to it. This is a project that you actually can touch, you want to touch, not because you're an architect and you touch everything you see, as we all do, but because it tells a story of a tactile experience that otherwise you wouldn't see on a normal concrete wall. Another project that I hope you're familiar with, our Sifang Museum of Art in Nanjing. This is a very contextual project, again, following the idea that every project is site-specific. The site itself is on the mountains, overlooking the imperial city of Nanjing. And thanks to Arata Isozaki, who was the master planner, we got the best site of the whole context at the top of the mountain. Steven's idea was immediately to base the design on Chinese perspective that, opposed to the European perspective, doesn't have a vanishing point, but rather it's the movement of spaces in a semi-orthogonal way, right? There's no perspective to it. So based on that idea, developing the idea of having a base gallery that comes up and becomes a floating gallery around a courtyard that is also moving in a semi-orthogonal way, creating this parallax effect that you don't see, or you're trying not to see a vanishing point, but what you rather try to see is the movement of the spaces. Facade design came in very quickly as to this wanted to be monochrome, didn't want to have a color, wanted to be a monochromatic museum, where the base gallery is the one that sits on the ground, so it has to be heavy, and the floating gallery wants to be light and translucent. Board form concrete walls, stained black for the base, and translucent polycarbonate by Savic, I think, for the floating gallery itself. And there was a lot of interesting play that we did with bamboo and restored bricks for the landscape. And the floating gallery then is the one that promises great diffuse light for art exhibitions. and no requirements for artificial light at all. So when in the day, this facade allows natural light to come in, at night it would reflect interior light coming out of the project. And I close with this one, which I'm very proud to show you all, something that we're developing with Robert and his team. I'm very extremely grateful for your help and for everybody who worked on this project. And it's one that I felt that we had to include because it's what we're doing together. We're doing it in Shenzhen. But also because at the beginning of the lecture, I gave you shots of curtain wall buildings. So it's kind of, well, it's a cheap shot. You come in, you show us Tokyo, Moscow, and all the projects that I show you, there's no curtain wall building that we've done. So I can show you with this one that we can do a curtain wall building that is actually very simple, curtain wall design. It's very cheap, curtain wall design, although the client doesn't think that way. It's very attainable, and yet be non-repetitive, be charged with architectural concepts and meaning. If you cut this from Shenzhen now, as the exercise that I did on the first few slides, you will recognize this building because of its geometry. And I've talked too much about it, so I will just run you a video. I hope this works. Yes. Enjoy.
Yeah. 整个20世纪中，比特以及基因这两项极具颠覆性的科学概念得到迅猛发展，并且引领人类社会进入新的纪元。2015年，王俊创立探云智能，致力于用生命大数据、互联网和人工智能引擎探索生命，帮助人们更好地管理自己的健康。
The whole idea why I founded my, the iCarbonX, my second company, is really trying to sort of get the cost down to a level every individual could have the benefit.
基因传作者悉达多·穆克吉不久前曾与 Steven 及其设计团队深度讨论设计概念、灵感以及探云的使命。探云总部大楼位于深圳超级总部片区，落户此区最为中心的地带。体量 A 是基因，体量 B 是展开基因。体量 A 是生活，体量 B 是生活背后展开的工作。互围绕出的体量由4个绿色的连桥连接，就像4个碳原子键，成对联系两幢塔楼。曲线的体量就像人体，围拢了一片公共空间和一个圆形的知识池。微风轻拂，水池与树木为城市广场创造了舒适的微气候。建筑楼体的形态由体量 A 从体量 B 旋转而出。它们相互促进彼此，就像基因学的异位显性，一个基因表现改变另一个基因表现的现象。4个碳键连桥住满多种热带植物。下层2桥连接着公共活动场地，包括画廊和多功能厅，以及最重要的探云诊所。探云诊所是连接整个项目居住与工作的核心。上层2桥连接健康与营养，即咖啡厅、餐厅、健身房、云端会所和商务会所。屋顶花园平安远眺，深圳湾的美景尽收眼底。上层连桥通过一系列缓和的曲线楼梯，将探云团队的活动和社交空间引导至中庭空间。探云总部的设计具备多项风水优点：北向车库入口顺应5行方位，曲线形状暗合祥云图案，加宽连桥天地平行，增强连接性。入口即于水池之畔，景观墙树木遮挡北面，曲面转角柔和建筑体量，主体建筑围合东南，开放西北。我们将会利用地缘热泵制冷技术，就像我们在当代 MoMA 中使用过的660口地热井。雨水收集和循环水将为广场创造美好的微气候，并辅助灌溉景观植被及马桶冲水。通过彩釉玻璃上的白色釉点，为建筑提供良好遮阳。 我们期待继续深化我们的设计工作，为探云和深圳塑造一个鼓舞人心的建筑典范。谢谢。
In closing, and I didn't want to talk over the video so you could enjoy it. In closing, I think this building, it's a curtain wall building, a repetitive curtain wall facade, unitized, but embodies everything that I've discussed today, the idea of the insertion of public functions, connectivity, porosity, the idea of a greater concept applied to the form of the building and the materiality of the facade. Much more than just a mere scheme. Thank you.
Great, Roberto. Thanks a lot. Questions for Roberto? You were very clear, but I think what you show is really amazing. The coherence between the facade and the project, they are so linked that it's not you see, every architect is working in a different way, and here the project is just arriving as a whole. The facade is just the consequence of the project. It's part of it. We had this morning a presentation by Arep, where the client was asking for years, a few years, to change the facade all the time, while the project was already under construction. We see clearly here that the facade and the project are completely linked, and that flexibility is not there, but that makes also its strength and its uniqueness.